Failure messes with your head. When you fail, it really affects your sense of self-worth.
When you fail to achieve a goal you imagined you could achieve, or you fail to do something that you thought it would be possible to do, it calls into question your identity on a really fundamental level.
When we fail, we wonder, is the goal I set for myself more difficult than I thought it was? Or am I just not as intelligent or as capable or as disciplined as I thought I was?
And when we look around and we see others succeeding, we think, why can't I do that?
In this video, I want to talk about two things. First, I want to talk about what causes us to fail. Why do things not work out for us? And second, I want to talk about how redefining success might help us get what we actually want out of life. Now, one person who really understood the causes of failure was Niccolo Machiavelli.
Machiavelli was a politician and philosopher who lived in 16th century Florence. He worked as a diplomat until he was imprisoned and tortured and exiled for allegedly participating in a conspiracy to overthrow the ruling Medici family. Getting exiled, that's a special kind of failure. If you're exiled, that's a real setback. While in exile, Machiavelli wrote his most famous work, The Prince, which many people regard as a kind of handbook for leadership, though Machiavelli's advice is notoriously ruthless. The Prince is a how-to book for rulers so they can achieve their ambitions, rule their kingdoms, and avoid failure. And in this book, Machiavelli identifies two factors that determine success or failure. They are fortune and virtue. He says that fortune is the arbiter of half of our actions, but she leaves the other half, or close to it, for us to govern.
Fortune can either be good, like when you're born into a wealthy family, or it can be bad, like you're born into poverty, or you're entering the job market in the midst of an economic crisis. This is a real source of frustration for us, but it's something we know deep down to be true. Often factors outside of our control can cause us to fail. You can do everything right, but if fortune is not on your side, you can still fail. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth by fortune.
But remember, fortune is only half the story for Machiavelli. The other force that determines success and failure in human life is virtue. And virtue is up to you. For Machiavelli, your virtue is your human capacity to achieve your goals. It's your intelligence, your resolve, your preparedness, your adaptability. These are the various capacities that you can develop to set yourself up for success. And if we have not sufficiently developed those capacities, we might fail. So what can we take away from Machiavelli? First, sometimes failure is not our fault. The odds can be stacked against us. Machiavelli notes that even extremely talented, hardworking people can still be mowed down by bad fortune. But he also encourages us to develop our own virtues so that we can overcome the misfortunes that will inevitably befall us. Maybe we can't always predict the bad thing that's going to present itself as an obstacle in our life, but we can train ourselves to expect delays, to anticipate difficulties so that we're ready when fortune throws a punch.
I think we get stressed about failure and success because we get fixated on this idea of benchmarks. We think by the time we reach a certain age, we should have attained certain goals. And if we haven't hit those targets by the right age, we start to think that we're failing at life. And it's extra hard when we see other people achieving the goals that we set for ourselves. What makes them so special? Why can't I do that?
In business and psychology circles, they call this the comparison trap. As Rebecca Weber writes, measuring the self against others is a modus operandi of the human mind. And in some ways, it can be helpful. The inspiration you feel about someone else's achievements can rev up the motivation to improve your own life. The recognition that your abilities are a notch above someone else's can deliver a boost to your self-esteem. But comparisons can be harmful when they leave you feeling chronically inferior or depressed.
But maybe these imaginary benchmarks we set for ourselves aren't useful, or maybe we just need different benchmarks.
Earlier, I mentioned that avoiding failure might have to do with redefining success. And we find a lesson about this in an ancient dialogue by the philosopher Plato called the Alcibiades. Now, Alcibiades was a historical figure. He was a real guy, and he was the most talented youth in Athens. He came from a wealthy family, and even as a teenager, people could see that he was going to be a superstar in politics. He was going to lead the city. But as Plato tells this story, just before Alcibiades makes his entry into the political arena, he is confronted by the philosopher Socrates. Socrates says, "Alcibiades, I know what you're after. You want to rule the world." And it's true, Alcibiades literally wanted to rule the world. Alcibiades defined success like a lot of us do. He wanted power and status. But Socrates points out that Alcibiades doesn't actually know how to rule the world. Alcibiades doesn't really know much about politics, and Socrates demonstrates it's because he doesn't really know much about people. And Socrates teaches him that the best way to begin to understand people is to try and understand yourself. But here's the trick. Once Alcibiades comes to understand himself, he may realize that ruling the world, acquiring all these worldly goods, is not something he wants after all, because acquiring those things is not actually going to satisfy him. So Socrates is able to redefine success in human life. For him, it's not about worldly goods, power, honor, status, money. Instead, it's about acquiring self-knowledge. Is it actually such an easy thing to know oneself? Sometimes I think, Socrates, that anyone can do it. But then sometimes I think it's extremely difficult. But Alcibiades, whether it's easy or not, nevertheless, this is the situation we're in. If we know ourselves, then we might be able to know how to cultivate ourselves. But if we don't know ourselves, we'll never know how. Because it's only by knowing yourself that you can actually come to understand what you want and what you need. We often assume that money and fame and power will lead to fulfillment and happiness. But Socrates demonstrates that might not be the case. Lots of rich and powerful people are deeply unhappy. So you might get all those worldly things and still be unhappy. You might get all those things and still be a failure. And so in the end, the pursuit of self-knowledge might be the true path to success. Now, another way of avoiding failure is by making better decisions, and Machiavelli can help you with that. You should check out this video on Machiavellian decision-making tactics. I will see you there, and I'll talk to you soon.